Hello and welcome back to Rambling Reviews. Had to pause there so I didn't say rewind reviews. We're taking a look at the final episode of Book 2 of Infinity Train. That's right, we made it, guys. What a half a month it's been. We're at the number car. Right, so there's a lot to talk about, obviously, and there's an elephant in the room element of this because of how so some of the stuff I was talking about was the end of the last episode, but I'm going to put a little pin in that for a minute and we're going to come back to it. I'm going to review the episode first, get that out of the way, and then we'll come back to, at the end of the last episode I talked about some stuff that I was like, if they don't deal with this then there's going to be some concerns. We'll come back to it. So, the final episode of this particular book, I hope not the last time we see these characters, but I mean, they were pretty good this year, resisting the temptation to bring like OG Tulip back into it, or Atticus, or Amelia, or any of the major players from the previous season. So, alright, I guess maybe we'll never see these characters again. A quick recap of the episode and then we'll talk about it. This is the episode where Tulip, confronted by 1-1, is sort of making the case to him, I'm a person, I deserve a number. He's like, well, you can't have a number, you're good at helping people. Look, you helped Jesse off the train. And then they look up Jesse on the computer and realize his number got to 0, but he's in processing, which means he's back on the train somehow. So they go to find him, they get his tape, and his tape of whatever led him to being back on the train the second time is the tape of his journey with Tulip. It starts with him getting on the train, meeting Tulip, Mirror Tulip MT, Lake, actually, sorry, I can call her Lake now. I might as well take advantage. I've been having to call her MT all season. She's finally got a name, I might as well take advantage of it. It tells the story of his meeting Lake and them becoming friends, and then him being separated, and then him getting home. And I did say earlier in the season I really want to see the moment he goes home and meets his brother again and makes things right. And it's a little rushed here, but it was a pretty thin storyline to start with, so it's okay. He apologizes. We basically get that's our our excuse to go back and see how that turned out. But it seems that he basically had a decision to make because he didn't like that he left the train without Tulip. So he's gotten back on the train with his new problem being that he wants to get off with Tulip, but that creates a sort of a paradox, a recursive loop for 1-1, who can't let Lake off because she's a denizen, but they also have to get Jesse off. But if his only reason he's on there is to help get Lake off, then it's very confusing for him. For 1-1, he can't really process this problem and like how to handle it. Timing of timings, the remaining Fleck gets into the car. Sieve, I think he's called, or something like that. He's pretty mad that Lake killed Mace, reasonably so, and he says, "I've got a solution to your problem, 1-1. You wanna sort this out? If she doesn't exist, then there's no one for him to save. Then he can go home and everything goes back to normal." One's like, "Yeah, that would work, I guess." And then he tries to kill Lake, at which point during the action sequence, she has a great idea to, she holds her hand up to Jesse so the numbers reflect. And she goes, look, I've got a number. Can we get our door now? And 1-1 in typical woman fashion is like, yeah, sure. Like it never mattered in the first place, which is insane. Because of the effort they've gone through to get it. They get the door. They get to go home. She chooses the name Lake, happily ever after. So let's break the content of this episode down bit by bit. Because there's a lot happens in a very short space of time. I think this does suffer a little bit from the problem the first season had, maybe even more so, of the ending feeling a little rushed. Pacing's tricky when you've got 10-minute shows, and you set up a lot, some text, some subtext, to handle everything. It's a thought that's going to come back later, but on the whole, I think this is a really good episode. There's a lot of really cool stuff in it. A huge number of really interesting, clever ideas that felt like they were very much in the design from the beginning of this story being told. And that's always satisfying to know that the writers really knew where they were going with it. And it's not just random stuff they're throwing at us to distract us for 10 minutes a turn, 10 times. I felt like they had a real idea of where this story was going from day one, and I think that's always pretty good. Open straight up with you realize how much you missed 1-1 in this episode. Like, when I think you accidentally slipped and broke a porter many times in a row. God, I missed him. I know you. You're the rare foil version of my friend Tulip. Like, he has so many great lines in this episode. The other one being when they're in Jesse's tape and she shows up and he goes, "You've got co-star billing now, and you'll probably be paid less because Hollywood breeds gender inequality." Like, 1-1, all this did was make me just realize how much I missed 1-1. Like, ridiculous. He's very funny in this episode. He's just such a consistent and brilliant source of comedy. And I like that we finally got confirmation on the name of those duck robots. They're called porters, apparently. I'll try and remember that. Probably forget, but yeah, that makes sense. That's another thing that you get on transport. I don't know. So yeah, I like that when they use that whole joke of "I know you're, a rare foil version of my friend Tulip," to set sort of MT off, to set Lake off again on like the core of this problem, which is, no, I'm not a sliver, I'm not a null, I'm not Tulip, I'm not any of these names you're giving. Everyone else is insisting on giving me. I'm my own person. It was really important, I think, that the end. This episode ended with her choosing her name. It's something I've predicted all series, really, and I think that's right. I think it's like I talked about very briefly in another episode, maybe not very briefly, who knows, with these. Sometimes it doesn't matter that the ending is predictable. If it's that predictable, it might be because it's the right ending for that character. So 100%, her getting off the train and choosing a name for herself, perfect. I mean, one of the ways in which they sped through this is obviously she lands and she looks around and she's like, "A lake, cool, I'm lake." Like, it's all a bit quick, but that's okay. 10 minutes an episode, a lot going on. I think that's fine. One thing I noticed was that 1-1 refers to them as the denizens of the train multiple times through this episode, and I kind of felt like, I guess that is just the word for them. I can't decide if that's just what I've been calling them this whole time, and it just happens to have been the same exact phrasing that the creators chose when it came to sort of referring to them as a kind of being like that in the show. But I don't recall anyone using the word denizen on this show prior to this episode. Yeah, I've been using that exact word to describe them. I guess it is just such the right word that it occurred to me way prior to the show doing it, or the show used that word to describe them in an earlier episode, a much earlier episode, and I've forgotten, and it sort of got embedded, and that's where it came from. I can't tell. It's kind of like what came first, the chicken or the egg. Like I can't tell if I started calling them that because it's so clearly the perfect word to describe the people who live on this train, or did I hear it in an earlier episode and therefore it was in my brain for that reason? Unclear, but yeah, that's kind of their official title now, the denizens. So that's how we'll be referring to them going forward, as if that's not what we did already. 1-1 feels pretty confident in this episode that she's kind of where she's supposed to be. It's interesting because the more I think about it, the more I go like, well, wait a minute, like there's a lot of complex stuff going on here. So denizens of the train were kind of like created by the train, right? Like, they kind of belong to the train. There's those orbs we saw last year, and you could sort of reprogram one of them to be different. So maybe they're all just programmed to want to stay, but is that a system of control? Is that messed up in itself? I don't know. Why is MT different? Is MT even a denizen in that sense? Because that was one thing that occurred to me, is like all the other beings on the train seem to have been created by 1-1. So look, let's take Atticus or Alan Dracula as the perfect examples of this. Created by the train, live on the train, exist to help the things. MT her vanishing led to Tulip's actual real-world reflection disappearing. So there is some sort of mirrored reflection dimension that the train drew upon to create MT. So was she created in the traditional way? Is there an orb of MT? Doubt it. So then you sort of go, well, is she slightly different to the other denizens of the train? Is that maybe why she wishes to leave? I don't know. I feel like it's still unlikely she's the only person on that train that wants to go. But she's been pleased that she's played her role so well, obviously helping Tulip on her journey previously, and then particularly this time helping Jesse go from basically a number higher than the one he got when he came in to 0 and leaving. You know, so One-One's kind of like, why would you want to leave? You're so good at helping people. And that is, from One-One's robotic sort of computerized perspective, that's the goal. There's nothing else matters. All the other stuff is just noise to him, because he's a program with a function, and he doesn't really care. Like, there's no debate about excuse me, the morality of that function or any of the other complicated ideas that might surround it. It's all very straightforward to him, you know, because that's just what he's programmed to do. But of course, you know, she's her own person. She's not there just for the benefit of other people. She wants to be there for herself. Then we have one of my favorite ideas of this whole thing, which is that Jesse, this paradox is so clever. It works on so many levels, and I feel stupid for not having foreseen this as the explanation for how Jesse ends up back on the train. It's perfect. It's so clever. So he goes home, makes up with his brother, and now his problem is no longer, he's learnt his lesson. His problem is no longer, you know, I do things because I want other people to think well of me, not for myself, or do the right thing necessarily. He's learnt that lesson. He's apologized to his brother. He's not going to hang out with those people anymore. They made that clear in the last episode we had with him before the Wasteland one, the mall car episode. But he's got a new problem. His new problem is his friend is trapped on a train. So that problem brings him to the train. But that's not a problem the train can help him solve, because Lake can't leave. So he ends up. Actually, just to go to it, do you think there's a single episode of this podcast I didn't accidentally call Lake Tulip instead of Mirror Tulip? I bet there isn't. I bet I didn't get through one episode without making that mistake at least once. So it's this paradox that like absolutely breaks One-One. Like, because One-One's like, no problem, we'll help you get off the train. But denizens can't leave the train, so you can't get off the train. But we need to help you get off the train. But you can't get off the train. But we need to help you get off the train. And it causes the number on Jesse's hands to completely glitch out, and it's really clever. You know, it's this glitchy number. It's the square root of 2. It says that twice. At one point, there's the pi symbol on there. My favorite one is at one point it says HG, which is the periodic table, like the sign for Mercury, which as an element does have the chromy appearance of MT. So it's like the computer's trying to process the request, and because part of it is, you know, save the Chrome girl. That's somehow in the coding, and therefore it's showing up in his number as it's glitching out. That's how I perceived that. I thought that was a really cool nod. I liked that. Well, yeah, at one point it did like the tongue sticking out emoticon. At one point it did 49/13 or divided by 30. I didn't really understand that one. I couldn't find any. I tried doing some Googling to see if that was anything. It doesn't seem to be, that I can tell. There's no like link to any obvious thing that's there. It seems a bit random. At one point it just does the letter E and the letter I. I'm trying to think of other stuff that come up on it. I think that's everything. So yeah, it's just randomly glitching out. And I think that's a really clever idea. I mean, actually, before I carry on with that, one line of One-One's I wrote down because I loved it so much is when he first confronts Jesse about coming back on the train. He says, "This train's for fixing problems, not hang time with buds." So that's obviously sets Jesse up to say, "Well, I do have a problem. My problem is you're keeping my friend trapped here." It's incredible. It's such a clever idea, and it really, really like the idea of putting a computer in a recursive loop, a paradox, where where the function can't end, it just keeps going round, is just genius. It's just, yeah, it feels like that's where they were going all along. I never saw it coming, but it made so much sense. It says a lot about Jesse's character that he chose to come back for MT. And also, obviously, we get that great moment with him this episode as well, where he says to Nate, his brother, he says, I shouldn't have let those guys hurt you. I shouldn't have hurt you. Where he sort of like, he almost adjusts himself, like he's like, because he realizes he's almost putting the blame back on those guys, and really there is an element of it was his fault, and he can't pretend that it was their fault when he was so so involved and so implicit, so explicitly involved in that in their like essentially bullying of his brother. So Jesse like comes out of this episode just as an absolute hero of all measures. Like, he comes back for MT, he makes up brother, perfect. What a great character he's become and turned out to be, and I really feel like he's learned a lesson. I really feel like he's grown. His arc was so well tracked. It made perfect sense. I had a couple of questions as we went on about why Eisenhower was going down, but most of those I managed to figure out in the end. It was all very well thought out. Sadly, I can't say the same for MT, and I suppose now we get to the to the elephant in the room. Before we go into like describing the ending, let me just clear this up. I do still have some serious concerns and issues with MT. I don't feel like she truly learnt anything, or at least it wasn't clear what exactly she learnt, in the same way it was for Jesse. Jesse had this really cathartic and powerful moment where he got to choose not to go with the Apex guys and tell them off and say, no, I'm not going with you people. You're this isn't right, and I'm not going to deal with you or anyone like you. It was such a very specific moment. MT wanted to be herself. She was selfish about it in the beginning. She hung out with Jesse. They did become friends, but in the end, she was still being selfish. She was putting all these people through all this stuff to get off. She abandoned that old man. She killed Mace. She tried to steal that young girl's number. I just don't think you can excuse it. And she's somehow rewarded by being free in the end. And I feel like that should have been more earned. Honestly, I think the answer for this might have been to just coax one into giving her a number and saying, right, bye Jesse, you go. MT's still got some learning to do, and putting her back on the train, but as a passenger now, not as, rather than ending this series on her being free, ending this series on her being a passenger now. And that way you can do one more series where she meets another person on the train and they learn, and she actually gets to grow, because I just don't feel like she did. She became slightly less. Basically, their version of growth for MT, for Lake in this series, is that she wanted to get off. She was grumpy. She met Jesse. She was slightly less grumpy, but she still wanted to get off at all costs, at anyone's expense. And then when she got off, she chose the name Lake and got her identity, and that was symbolic of her choosing her own identity. I feel like, it's frustrating for me. I will say to the counterpoint to that, as a criticism that I will hear and I understand. And the reason I think this probably wasn't a big of an issue for anyone else, and I'm sure the comments down below, people already I'm sure just from the previous episode, people are already giving me shit for putting it that way. But I think the counter argument is, at no point in the text of the previous episode or two did they do anything to show that Mirror Tulip had done anything wrong. So I have spotted behavior that I found immoral from the character, but the show never dubbed it as such. So it's a for me, at best, it's a subtext that I've read into it rather than actually part of the text. It would be more egregious and less forgivable if the Tulip character, having killed Mace, having thrown the old man out of his thing, or just after trying to steal the little girl's number, going, "Oh my god, what have I done? Like, I'm a monster." That's making it the text of the show. And then it absolutely, inexcusably needs to be dealt with. Like, if you don't deal with it when you've done that, it is inexcusable. That's bad writing. But they've done that thing where it was not set up to be that kind of story. Those beats were plot beats to get her to this position. They weren't really there to push a character story. And I've read into them and seen those moral choices and disagreed with them strongly. And therefore I want the catharsis of seeing her have to grow. But I accept that's not really the intention of the text. So it is a criticism from me, and it's something I felt strongly watching it, as you may have gathered from my, the last 2 episodes. But it's not really, from what I can see, the story they were trying to tell. Unfortunately, the practicality of it got in the way a little bit, because they had to get her from A to B, and to get her from A to B quickly, they had to take these sorts of shortcuts where she made questionable choices. So yeah, it's a bittersweet one, because I still love this episode and I still like this series very much. I think the intention was Jessie was the one who was supposed to be growing, and MT was the one who was fighting for her identity. And by the time of the end of the series, her arc is complete, because she's free enough to choose a name for herself, which is good and symbolic, and that's why it's a nice moment. But again, I think in a show that's been so good at very, very carefully tracking character growth, that did in this episode have Tulip look at herself from the Toad car episode and say, "Well, I suppose I've grown too," with no evidence of that. Other than that she said to Jessie, "Your friends are jerks," which, was evident, I think, to everyone but Jessie. I don't know. There's no real growth there. And that does make it part of the text. So, I don't know. Is it like game breaking? Is it show breaking? Am I done with the show? No, of course not. I absolutely had a blast with the series, particularly this episode. There's a couple more little things I want to talk about from this anyway. But let's just, deal with that and say that I think it is a problem, and it has certainly affected my enjoyment of the last 2 episodes. Is there a solution? I'm not a writer of the show, but if I was to, I would say maybe take some more episodes. I would say maybe do 12. With dealing with 2 protagonists, I think one has eaten into the time of the other, and vice versa. And it's an interesting choice, but I think it's actually harmed the show's ability to tell a more cohesive story. Because I think, had there not been a Jessie subplot, had Jessie not been in this and it just been MT's story, or vice versa, we wouldn't have had this problem. Because basically what you had to do in the end was you really had to get add 2 more episodes. Just add 2 more episodes. I know that sounds silly, but if you'd have had an episode dealing the way that the mall car episode crescendoed beautifully, in a way that really brought Jessie's dilemma and lesson to the forefront, I feel like with another episode or 2, you could have really turned her journey through the tape car and the number car into a cathartic moment of MT realizing that she was on the verge of taking other people's freedom to gain her own, and that wasn't the way to do it. and then she starts smashing. It could have been done so much differently, and then I would have really felt like she'd learned something. The murder thing they pass off again in this episode. I only killed him because he was trying to kill me, and then obviously Steve is like, "Oh, well, I'm finishing that job for him," and comes after, and he's become mustache twirly villain now, which I don't like as much because I look, that's one of those things that you he was the more nuanced of the two, I thought, and then I've been proven wrong. Between this episode and the Wasteland one, in the end, Steve ended up being just like that, I'm gonna kill you, whereas Mace ended up being the more nuanced one. I had all these interesting thoughts about her place on this train. Yeah, lots to break down. You gotta give him credit. I mean, a lesser show wouldn't have dealt with any of this stuff in the first place, let alone, it should be commended for trying to tackle these complex ideas, even if it doesn't always hit like perfectly knock it out of the park. And that's really only these last two or three episodes. That's small niggle at the end of the Wasteland episode, and then some concerns about these last two. But I really do feel like they missed a trick with Lake growing. I stand by that, but I understand the counter arguments. So feel free to leave comments. I understand. Feel free to put your thoughts down below. I won't, no problem. You call me now the names you like, but that's how I feel about it. So let's move on. I did find it odd that when I'm probably saying his name wrong. Siv, the Sive, I don't know, the other Fleck. When he says you killed Mace, at no point does Jesse go, I have questions. I have several questions. Like, he doesn't, and again, it's because it's not in the text of the show, but I feel like if this was mid-season, Jesse would have been like, you killed someone, and it would have been like a big plot point, but gotta move it along. Jesse ain't gonna acknowledge that. We're just gonna go. I thought it was clever that like he comes, the Fleck comes in with a potential solution for 1-1. Like, hey, I kill her, this solves all of our problems. One's like, yeah, okay, that kind of sounds like it might work. What does 1-1 say after that? He does that. He sort of undercuts it in his typical 1-1 fashion. I think the solution is clever. For those who don't remember as well, the actual solution to how MT gets off the train in the end is she holds her hand up to Jesse's so that her number reflects his, and she goes, I've got a number now, can I get a door? And one was like, yeah, okay. Which that's the right way to do a shortcut. I know that sounds weird, but after all that effort, it could kind of be, you could kind of go, oh god, well, that was pretty easy in the end. That's all they needed to do. Yikes, But I think making that the joke, have 1-1 just switch from, how are we going to solve this paradox to, okay, and just make the door happen, is actually just really good, because it's funny, because it just makes you go, he probably could have solved this immediately by just giving her a door. Like, she didn't need to, she shouldn't have needed to trick him, I guess, but his programming wouldn't allow him to think laterally enough to I'm more convinced than ever, by the way, that someone crafted this train and designed this train and created 1-1 and programmed 1-1, because otherwise it doesn't really make any sense, because he doesn't have as much free will as I thought he did based on the first season with Tulip and Atticus, the first book, because he can't solve this problem until she shows him she has a number. And that is like how she gets around that part of his programming that's telling him, no, she absolutely can't have a door. Of course she can't have a door, she doesn't have a number. She convinces him he has a number enough for him to go, okay, and he can just create the door. Like, he always had the power to create the door, but his programming wouldn't allow it, because that's not how the train is supposed to work. So it's actually really clever, but it does again convince me even more that there is some sort of higher power in this world. I don't know if it's a person created the Infinity Train to try and help people, or if that's ended up being an accidental byproduct of the thing that was created, or who knows. Maybe it's Santa Claus. Who knows at this point? Not I. So yeah, but I thought that was a really neat solution, because it's a gag. It's really simple, so it can be explained very quickly, which means we get the nice few moments at the end of the episode of them on the lake, which we wouldn't get if you had to do a more complicated explanation of how she gets out of this one. it kind of works perfectly. Alan Dracula's goodbye is suitably brilliant. So she goes through the portal, or she's going through the portal with Jesse, and the Fleck grabs her foot and is trying to pull her back, and she throws a bit of grass through that alerts Alan Dracula, and he just zaps. Absolutely obliterates him. Actually, I guess Alan Dracula's as much of a murderer as Tulip, as Lake. Sorry, he like absolutely obliterates Steve, and then he like eats the grass, and it's just like it's really gross. There's like bits of that guy everywhere, and his mask is there on the floor. It's disgusting, but quite funny. The show showing very little care for. That is actually, I suppose that is kind of like, that's equally questionable, because it's just like, you can't insist that MT Lake is a person and deserves to have choices and live, and then just like be murdering the other mirror reflection people. That seems extreme, but I guess, hey, it's a really good gag. It's funny. And then like Alan Dracula, one's like, I really broke the mold with you, and Alan Dracula just blasts away. His feet just turn to rockets, and he just, like flies off, like, he's come in, he saved the day, and off he goes to save another life. I love it. It's really funny. It's despite myself, like, it's really good. The last moments on the lake are really sweet. We get a little bit with Nate meeting MT. We have the moment she chooses her name. We'll laugh a little, we'll love a little. It's very good. Questions about her life going forward, I suppose. Like, what is she gonna wear makeup to make herself like less captured by the government and experimented on? Does she go see OG Tulip at some point? I've got questions. I kind of want a show about that now. They'll never make it. It's not really in the vibe of Infinity Train, but I would love a little short movie that told some stories about what happened to MT afterwards. Like, because with Tulip, you're just like, well, she goes off and she lives her life. With Jesse, he gets off the train. You go, well, he just goes off and he lives his life. But there's questions and drama around the idea of MT adjusting to the real world, or the real world adjusting to her. She may not quite have her identity. She's still going to be Mirror Girl. She's and would putting on makeup and hiding herself from like reality, would that be flying in the face of her new identity? Would that be hiding her identity? So I don't know. There's basically, I feel like there's more storytelling and drama and things to explore and squeeze out of Lake than certainly more so than Jesse, and certainly more so than the original Tulip. It felt like their journeys were quite complete. And I don't know if it's a symptom of just the fact that, like, I still don't feel like she went on, like, she changed, or if it's just a symptom of the fact that obviously the show made such a point of, you can't just go to the real world. What are you going to do? Go to school? Like, that now I'm going, yeah, what is she going to do? Maybe the show shouldn't have raised those questions, because now I'm sort of going like, yeah, what next for her? So yeah, there's a lot to think about there too. So yeah, there's a lot left undealt with. On the whole, the series, these episodes, they just got better and better and better up until these last two, which were a little bit fell short for me for the reasons that I previously mentioned. But like, as a whole, what a great series this is. It deals with such interesting ideas. I love the characters. It's always funny. It's always creative. There's genius ideas in every episode. From simple ones like the room where you can't get out unless you kick the toad, something morally reprehensible because he's like, please don't kick me, or to more complicated ideas like the idea that the Apex group and the way that pulled out Jesse's story, or just some of the cool stuff we got to find out about how the train works in these last two episodes. There's just always something genius happening in the show, and it's always engaging, and it's always funny, and it's oddly restrained when it comes to respecting the previous series, because shows like this often get panicky about there not being enough familiar imagery, and they go all out on bringing back loads of characters and stuff. And I cannot tell you how much I respect that we had an episode that had a bunch of the characters in the first season appear, and one of them even got a speaking role, 2 of them I suppose, but it was very thin. They weren't part of the story. It was just that nice, like, warm fuzzy of, oh, here they are. But the rest of the series, it was focus on the new characters. Let's not let nostalgia for the first book affect this. You know, we're gonna show restraint. We're not gonna show Tulip. We're not gonna. One's only gonna play the part one needs to play. No Atticus whatsoever. You know, I really respect that they did that, because I think it's to the show's benefit when they do stuff like that. I think if you're going to commit to the idea of having a new cast for your second season, you need to really commit to that. Heroes need to maybe look at what they did as the example of how not to do it. They obviously were going to do it. The first season was so complete, and all the character arcs were so complete, and everyone goes like, "What happened to that show?" I'm like, "Yeah, they completed all the character arcs and solved all the mysteries from season 1." And the original idea was for season 2 to be like a completely new cast and completely new mysteries and character arcs to develop over the course of the 10, 20 episodes or whatever. But then everyone fucking got cold feet, and they're like, well, no one will watch the show without Hiro Nakamura. And they brought all the characters back. Terrible. Absolutely awful. And it really suffered for it. As well as shoehorning in a bunch of new characters that didn't get the time to be developed, so no one cared about them or liked them. And it's like, oh, God. How could you have got this so wrong? Anyway, that's a different story. But I respect so much that they really kept stuck to their guns here, and they and I hope the third season does the same. As much as I am talking about how I'd like to see more of Lake, like the reality is new characters, new stories, always moving forward. Like the train itself, I suppose, is the way to do it. What a great series. I'm excited for the third, but assuming that happens, keep watching it on HBO Max, guys. God knows where it goes. I'll probably be a little bit more active with that one in terms of, like, I might post them more close to when they're actually airing. So, like, if a trailer drops for that, I might do a video discussing the trailer. I didn't watch the trailer for this season at all, which is insane. Now I look back at it, like, how I resisted that temptation. I just went into it. If they do shorts, obviously I might do some videos on them, but I'll try and do them as they're airing rather than like months after. Try and keep it as relevant as I can. Although if they drop them all across a week again, I'm not going to be able to do one. I'm not going to be able to do like 2 a day, so I'll die. So yeah, but one other quick thing actually I did. Once I watched the final episode, I looked it up, and I was indeed correct that what's the other guy called? Simon? Grayson Simon. Well, I thought Simon was in the lineup from the end of the first season when Amelia looks through the other people who are on the train. But it turns out Simon and Grace were both there, and they both had huge numbers. So they were already bad to the bone at that point. And we get another glimpse of other passengers this week. End of season 2, same sort of screen as they're flicking through to find Jesse. And I found that really interesting because I wonder if any of those people are going to show up next year, either as our protagonist or as minor characters like the Apex guys. And will we even see the Apex guys again? I didn't think we'd see them again this season, obviously. I think I said that at the time. But interesting to see if they do decide to keep going with that plot. Yeah, they're not good people, and they could make a good villain. Like we had the Flex this series, who are both dead now. So I guess we're free to we're free of them. We need maybe some other threat. Maybe the Apex guys, they're after a particular denizen of the train who befriends the new protagonist, and they're sort of in pursuit the season to keep it sort of moving forward. Not that it needs that. The first season didn't have that kind of threat, really. I suppose it had the steward showing up quite regularly, so maybe it did. I don't know. We'll see. But yeah, still on board, despite my reservations about these last 2 episodes. They weren't episode breaking. They were just flaws by my view, and I could totally understand if people wouldn't see it that way. I hope I explained myself well enough to people to understand where I'm coming from. Yeah, so that's It does feel like we've been on a hell of a journey. I mean, we've only done 10 of these, but dear Lord, it's been a thing, isn't it? So yeah, I'm going to leave you guys to it, but thank you so much for listening to all these. If you have, as always, press like and all that jazz. Share with friends and share with enemies if you didn't like it, I suppose. But that's everything for this time. I'll speak to you guys soon enough, I'm sure, when we tackle book 3. But thanks for watching. Goodbye.